Awesome. Okay, so this afternoon we're going to talk a little bit about types, what they are, the different kinds of types, how to convert one type to another. So what is a type? A type is a thing that has a built-in set of characteristics where the developer and the engine sort of know what to expect out of it. You know, a string has certain methods to it, and it behaves in a certain way. Same with a number, an object, an array, etc. So there's some different types in JavaScript. The two main classifications of types is the primitive and the object. Primitive types are sort of like the building blocks in a way of like the most granular level. A string, number, boolean, undefined, and null are all primitive types. We'll go over more of like what makes a primitive type like so special, but those are sort of like the basics, the starters. Then there's the objects. Everything in this, like an object is an object, but an array is also a type of object. So object, array, date, regex, and function, those are all types of objects. In certain ways, JavaScript is a very object-oriented programming language. It can also be a functional programming language. But the fact that all these things are objects make it easy to pass them around and like do things with them. And objects have their own special ways of behaving, and each of these objects have a special way, different properties and methods you can call in it that are built into JavaScript. Today we're going to mostly be looking at the primitive built-in types. Tomorrow we'll start talking about array, like methods and properties of arrays. Okay, so numbers, one of the primitive type. A nice thing about JavaScript, which is not like every language, is that a number is a number. It can be a decimal point, it can be an integer, it can be a negative number, it can be a float. There's like a lot of different terms. There's integers, floats, doubles, what have you. Those are all considered a number in JavaScript. So you don't have to be like, is this going to be a float or like an integer? It's all a number. So that's great. It makes things much more straightforward. So it's like if you want to have a counter, you have a number. Number is very useful in JavaScript. To do basic arithmetic with numbers, they have the built-in methods. The plus, minus, multiplication, division are sort of like what you would see on a calculator. So those are straightforward. The really fun one is the... Oh, cool. We're going to hear no more of that beeping. The modulus is a really fun one that actually comes in handy a lot. It's the remainder. So you take 5 divided by 5, whatever that remainder is, in this case 0, would be returned. So the remainder would equal 0. You might have seen this earlier today in seeing whether or not something was even or not. If it's divisible by 0 and returns, or if you divide it by 2 and the remainder is 0, that's even. Yeah, so there's like some fun things to do with it. There's like, if you want to figure out if a number is prime, there's some like fun algorithms that really utilize modulus. Modulus is a great thing to play with, so yeah, if you like numbers, it's a fun one. Keep an eye out for it. One thing about the primitive data types is that it's immutable, which just pretty much means if you want to modify it, you have to reassign it to itself or another variable. You can't just say like num divided by 2, because like num is still going to be 12. You have to say num equals num divided by 2 to make num 6. That's not the case for certain things like arrays and whatnot. And we'll talk a lot about immutability and mutability, whatever the we'll talk about immutability a lot with arrays because their methods are sometimes immutable, sometimes not. But primitive is always immutable. So like a string, you can't just like add the exclamation point to the string. You have to say like my string equals my string plus exclamation point. So remember to always reassign. And if you're getting to a point where you're like, I've done this operation and it's not happening, check for that. Some fun shorthands that JavaScript has built in is like this plus equals 2, which is just shorthand for num equals num plus 2. You can do that for all of the arithmetic things. You can do it for the add, subtract, multiply, and divide, which is nice. And then there's the num plus plus and the num minus minus. I don't think you can do that for multiplication division. That's just a plus and a minus thing, and that just adds 1 or subtracts 1 from that number. Yeah, and there's other built-in things, but those are the main ones that you'll see. Like that's in the for loop. We have I plus plus in the for loop. That's adding 1 to I. You can also write I equals I plus 1 in your for loop if you want to. Just to like make it super clear, but I plus plus, you'll get really used to seeing that. Booleans is another type of primitive type. This one, it's true or false. So like something can be either true or false. Like, is this even true or false? Is this a cat? True or false? You can't have false or true as a variable name. And that's true for all the keywords. Like sometimes I forget new is a keyword. So I'm like var new, because that's like a fun variable name. But new is a keyword. And you can't do that. And you'll get this kind of syntax error if that happens. What's nice about REPL and many other text editors is it highlights keywords in a different color. So if you're like, why is this variable like a different color than all the others? It might be because it's a keyword. So make sure it's not one of the reserved words. Null. Null is a great data type. It's different than undefined in many ways. Null, you have to explicitly say equals null, or like return null. And it can be useful if you want to like have a function that returns, let's say like, I don't know, it returns like someone's birth date, but if it's not a person in your database already, we don't have their birth date, so we're going to return null. Like we don't have that person, there is no birth date. We're going to return null, and that as a developer, you utilize null in many ways to do like null checks and handle it different ways. Be like, you're not a user. Yeah, so, and it's nice to have it as a placeholder, like at the beginning of function, assign a variable null as like the default return, and then if you reassign it in the function, then like it has a value, and then just return that variable at the end. It's like really common practice. But undefined. Undefined is everywhere because, like, and I don't know if anyone's seen on a web page before, like when the word undefined pops up, I always find it really funny. But so we have like var middle name. We haven't assigned it anything. So if we console log middle name, it's going to console log the word undefined. So if you're trying to console log something, you see undefined, it might be because it's not defined yet. In the case, this can also be like if you've defined it, but like it's lower in your code. The way JavaScript works is like it doesn't evaluate after the equals sign. Like if you have var middle name equals like Anne, it's not going to assign Anne to middle name until it reaches that line. So if you try to console log middle name before you've assigned it, it'll console log undefined. So that's like a thing to keep an eye out for. But it's like, it's everywhere. Also hoisting with functions, we'll talk about that a little bit, I think tomorrow. And if you declare it like var middle name equals a function, that will be undefined until that code is like ran. Does that make sense? Undefined is a type. So you can say like type of variable name and it'll return undefined. And then strings. Strings is probably one of the most popular. I think numbers and strings are some of the most popular primitive data types that you'll see and play with and like modify and have fun with. It's a way of keeping words, phrases, characters as a data type. So you can, most things are sort of strings if it's not a number. And so anything wrapped in single or double quotes will be a string. One thing to note, if you have like an apostrophe or like how hello is quoted, if these were single quotes, this would be a word, this would be a word, and they'd be like, what is this hello variable? So when you see like that kind of funkiness, that's probably what it is. I personally like double quotes, but I know in the industry, especially with JavaScript, single quotes are big because it's one less key to press. But it's all based on style, and once you get a job, you'll have a style sheet where it's like, we use double quotes for everything, or whatever, single quotes for everything. If you wanted to have single quotes and still have this single quotes, you would use the escape backslash, and then you can like have those single quotes without it messing anything up. Concatenation, I know some of this might be a review, but it's always good to just like make sure we're all on the same page. This is just like taking two strings and like putting them together. So here we're taking three strings. We're taking the first name, a space, and the last name, and you just add it together with the plus. Yeah, and like, so the plus sign in numbers is addition, the plus sign in strings is concatenation. And if you do a string plus a number, we'll see what happens later. And there's a few ways you can access things in a string. We're going to go over these a little bit more in detail in a second. But if you wanted like the first letter of a string, you can use bracket notation, similar to if you've accessed things in an array. You use bracket notation for that index. Remember that everything has the 0th index. So the first letter has the index of 0. And if you wanted that first letter, you do bracket 0 to get the capital F. You can also get like the length of it. We'll talk more about that, but that's useful if you're like, looping over it and you want to console log each letter. Very common. Okay, so we're going to do these here. So that's small. Yeah, that's better, right? Everyone can. Cool. Okay, so if we have like my string and have it equal, I'm going to do my lunch because we just had lunch. Set it equal to tacos because that's what I had. So if we wanted the first letter of the string my lunch, we can do var first letter equals my lunch bracket 0. And then if we console log first letter, that should give us capital T. Cool. And we can do that for like, so this is the 0th, first, second, third, fourth. So if we wanted that last letter, we would just do 4. And this is not an accurate variable name anymore, but it console logs out this first one. Put this back. Okay, another way you can access things is through this char at. So we have my lunch. If we want to access the first letter with char at, we just do var first letter is my lunch dot char at, and then you put in the index there. So char at is a method that is on all string types built into JavaScript. And you call it off of the string with a dot, and you invoke it with the index that you want. So in this case, I want the 0th index, the first one. And then if I do first letter, it should be capital T. Let's see. Cool. Clear to be sure. Yeah. So Similar thing, like, you know, we have 4 here, last letter, this should be S. So just as before, like there's 2 ways to get it. Yeah.
Just a quick question. Is there any reason to ever use char at instead of bracket notation?
From my experience, it's more preference. Char at is a lot more declarative of like what type you're doing it, because you can do bracket notation on like an array. So if you don't have great variable names, it could be confusing to another developer reading it, but bracket notation is very common. I think char at's just a little bit more declarative.
Do they return different things? Say if you do bracket notation and you put a letter or number in that doesn't exist, do the char at and the bracket return different?
Great question. Let's do that. Let's put 6 here, which is not in tacos. Cool. So that is nothing.
Yeah, it returns blank.
Is it? Yeah, it's blank. It's not even a space. And I'm curious, to see if we do bracket notation of 6 here. Okay, so here, if you do bracket notation with something that doesn't exist, it'll do undefined. Char at returns nothing based on what just happened. So yeah, great question. Yes, that's a great question. A string is of any length number of characters. A character is just one, so like the letter C. Yeah. So the char at will return a character. Great question. Yeah, which for JavaScript, you can treat characters and strings in very similar ways. It's there's not a lot of methods that are like, whoa, you can't put a character here. But in other languages, sometimes it's a little bit more strict. Okay, index of. Index of is great. It's sort of the opposite of char at, where char at, we know the index, we want to know the letter. Index of, we know the letter, we want to know what the index is. So if we do var second letter is my lunch dot index of 1, because remember it starts at 0 for indices, and then we console log second letter, we should get the letter A. And that is my mistake. I'm sorry. Yeah, we put the character there. I was still in char at. So here we get the index of. So if we want to do S, like we want to know where is the first time that the letter S appears in this string, my lunch. S index. This isn't a great name, but you know what I mean. Cool. So we see S is the 4th index. This can be useful if you put in like a string. You can do more than just a character. You can do COS, and it'll give you the first instance of the C where COS is a thing. So that should be 0, 1, 2. Cool. Does that make sense? So if you had a really long string, like a book or a chapter, and you wanted to find where a certain sentence or certain word first appears, you would use index of. One thing to note, if we had tacos are great because, that's not spelled right, but I want to have 2 COSs. They are food. I'm not very creative right now. We're still, if we have this, we still get 2. Because it gets the first instance of it, not like every. One thing to note, if we have, let's see, like dog is not in this sentence. So if we do index of dog, we're going to get -1 because if it doesn't exist in the string, it returns -1, which is really helpful if you want to do checks of like, does this exist? It will always return -1. And you should never get -1 if it does exist because you can't have like a -1 index in a string. Yeah. I'm going to say dog index. Okay. To uppercase. This is a great one. Let's say say we have a variable that is fun or activity and have it be coding. So we have this activity called coding. We want to make it all uppercase, or let's make this name. That's not fun. And we have Fred. And we want to like uppercase it, like we're gonna yell at Fred or something like "Happy birthday, Fred." We can console log name dot to uppercase, and this should output Fred in all uppercase. So that's fun. Yeah, and similar to that, there's the to lowercase. So if we have like var happy equals happy birthday in all capitals. And then we want to make it all lowercase. We just use the to lowercase method, and we run that, and so we can have like happy birthday, Fred. Maybe we want to just only scream Fred. We're like, oh, it's your birthday, but like you're not super excited about it, but we really like you, so we're gonna yell your name. Note that I use the parentheses in both of these. That's because these are methods that can you call off of the string. So you have the string variable name, or you can say like, this is a sentence. To lowercase, you can just have a string right like this and call to lowercase on it, and it'll do the same thing. And that's just because a variable name is the same thing as just having the string there, but like you can only use it once. So yeah, to lowercase and to uppercase, you call it off of the string, typically variable name, and you want to invoke it. So like you use the parentheses to invoke it because it's a method. All these that we've seen have been methods. Yeah, and split is also a method. So we have var cats, and I have my cats, Tiger, Abu, and Orange. We weren't really creative with naming Orange. It's an orange cat. And then we have cat names, and we set it equal to cats.split, and we pass in the delimiter, so where to split them. So we have a comma space between each of them. If we console log cat names, it should give me an array of Tiger, Abu, and Orange strings. Yeah, split is super helpful because it can take a string. Let's say you have a sentence and you want to do something specific to each one of those words, and you want to maybe like iterate through it or something. You want to take a long sentence, split it into an array of words. Split is really useful because you'll learn some array methods tomorrow, and there's so many great array methods. So sometimes it's easier to manipulate the data as an array, and this is a great way to get it there. This is the delimiter. If you don't put anything into split, it'll have the default of a space. So the next, so each, oh yes, you know what, I was wrong, I was thinking something else. So if you don't put anything into it, it'll just turn it into an array, like the string as an array. Yeah. that's not super clear here because it's like, here's an array. We can see that with cat names.length. Let's see how long this array is. 1. So it just like takes the string, puts it into an array. So if you want to make like encapsulate it in an array, that can be useful, but it's nice to have like space. And this should have like each of my cat names. Yeah, split's really useful. I use it all the time. Okay, and then the last one is not actually a method on strings, it's a property. So you don't invoke it with parentheses, you just say like dot length and it gives you that information. So we have a boo name, a boo. And so if we want to see how long the string is, we just say console.log a name dot length. And this should not be capitalized. And so that has a length of 3. And sometimes you might get an off by 1 thing because length gives you the actual length. It has the 1, 2, 3. There's 3 letters here, but indices start at 0. So there's this 0, 1, 2 indices. So definitely keep that in mind if you're trying to iterate over a string and you're getting undefined or something at the end. It might be because you're off by 1 or you're not getting the last letter. So definitely keep that in mind. But yeah, length is used everywhere. It's wonderful. Yeah. So any questions on these string methods?
So is there ever anything in the parentheses after uppercase set to lowercase?
No, great question. Yeah, it takes no arguments. It just like turns the whole thing uppercase or lowercase. And if you're ever have a question like that, you can't remember, you're like, I know that was asked, but like, what was it? You can go to the documentation. Goodness. And it will give you all the details of each of the methods and properties, which is really nice. So these are all the methods on strings. There's a lot of them. But so yeah, you can like go back to the char at, you're like, oh, I forgot. And it tells you, it takes the index, let me make this bigger. It takes the index, you do string dot char at, it takes the index, and it's an integer between 0 and 1 less than the length. So yeah. Documentation is good to look at, and just getting comfortable with it. If you're like, I want to use this, I forgot how to do it, they'll have like examples and stuff. They have great documentation. Yeah. A great thing, oh sorry, were there any other questions with the methods and properties? Type of operator. This is really nice. Sometimes you're going through your code, maybe you're debugging. I use type of 1 debugging a lot, and you're like, what is this variable? Like, it's being passed through here, it does some things, and then I pass it over here, but like, what's this variable at this moment? You can say, because console logging it, sometimes it's like not that helpful. If you console log the number 42 and the string 42, it's going to give you the same thing. So you're like, maybe it's a number that I can add to, maybe it's not. Using type of, space, and then whatever that variable is, or the number or whatever, it will return a string of what that type is, all lowercase. So like number, string, object. So it's useful for debugging. It also, yeah, it's mostly useful for debugging and sort of like exploring like what something is. Maybe a new API that you want to play with, you'll like console log the type of being returned. But if you're checking like if this type of is a string, you want to make sure it's all lowercase. and it's a string of number. One thing to note, all the like object types, the array, the date, the regex, the object, and functions too. No. Functions have different type when you say type of. If you say like type of array, it'll give you object. If you say type of a regex expression, it'll give you object. If you say type of null, it'll also give you an object. This is a mistake. This wasn't, it's not like null is an object. It doesn't have any object properties to it. JavaScript was made in 10 days. There's some mistakes here and there, and because this mistake has been around for so long, if they fixed the type of null to be like null, it would break the internet. So they're just like, we all just know null has the type of object. Like, we're just going to be fine with that. But everything else follows. Like, type of true is a Boolean. And then type of, if you have like a variable function, like myfunc, it will actually give you function. So that's the one object type that doesn't return object. It returns function because it's a special type of object. And then there's different ways to change the type of something. Like, just because it started as a number doesn't mean it will be a number forever in your code. You might change it to a string. Some ways to do that is through coercion. If you like take the number 4 and the string 8, you add them together. JavaScript has sort of like a set of rules of like, if this and this are like trying to do a thing, like this one wins. Like the string will win and turn it into a string and make the string 48 instead of 12. So it's going to coerce mynum into a string just for the addition. If then we use mynum later, it'll still be for the number. So just if coercion happens, it just happens in that one instance. It's not like changing the variable everywhere. But yeah, coercion is funky. You can change like strings into numbers, numbers into strings. But if you're just trying to add two things together or something, it sort of decides for you. Yeah, and it'll like coerce it into like one of them. There's a lot of, oh yeah, this next slide is about that. So when you like use coercion, or like coercion happens, it'll always return some primitive value. Maybe it's undefined, maybe it's a string. A lot of the times it's either undefined or a string. But that's why type of is really useful. If you're like trying to take two variables, do a thing with them, and assign it a new variable, if you're not quite sure what's going on, like why isn't this working, you can use type of to figure out what that new variable is. And it'd be like, oh, it's coercing it into a string. And that's like super helpful. So that happens during operations, like plus. Another time coercion happens is in like conditional statements, if, while, for, I think those are the main ones, switch. And that will coerce it into a Boolean. So if you have like a number 5, if the number 5, it's going to take that number and be like, I don't know what to do with this. Like, you can't say like if the number 5. So it's going to try to coerce it into a Boolean. In the case of the number 5, it'll coerce it into like a true statement, which we'll go over a little bit soon. So it'll coerce it into like a true or false every time you put in an if statement. And you'll learn sort of the rules of like what it gets coerced into. But yeah, those are times when coercion happens where it's like not, it might not be the same type that it was originally. And there's different ways you can do coercion. There's ways, sometimes it might be an accident, sometimes it's on purpose, that are implicit, where you're just like adding an empty string to a number, and when it's a string and a number battling, the string wins. So it's going to coerce the letter or the variable A into a string, and so B will be the string 42. So sometimes a shorthand you'll see like plus an empty string to coerce it into a string. Sometimes some would argue like cleaner way to do it, where it's like more declarative of what's happening, is through explicit coercion, where you have the capital string and you pass in the variable, and it'll take that variable, turn it into a string. You can also do that for like number. If you want to take B, do capital number B, that will make C the number 42. It'll have the type of number. A way that you could do implicit coercion with numbers is putting the plus sign. I'll show you. It's a little bit funky, but it's fun. So if I have var cookie count, and I have it as a string, maybe it's stored in the database as a string, and I want to console log type of cookie count. This should be string. Cool. And then if I do like var cookie num, I do plus cookie count. And if I do console log cookie num, just to make sure I'm getting what I want, and console log type of cookie num, we see that it's changed 5. 5 is going to be console log the same way. So this looks the same. That's why type of is so useful, is because you can be like, well, I don't know if it's a string or a number. So we took a string and made it a number just with this. This you could also do number with capital N, and it'll act the same way. If you did something like, if this was like ABC, so it's not a number, like what is ABC going to be turned into a number as? It'll return NaN as the cookie num. So it'll still have type of number, because type of NaN is a number. NaN stands for not a number. But yeah, so when you like reassign it, cookie num is NaN, because it's like, you want me to make this a number, but like I don't know what it is, so it's not a number. So if you see that, that's probably what's happening. Reasons why you would use like the plus operator instead of the capital number is normally for space. Like if you want to make your code a little bit more concise, you're doing like a long expression, which like probably you shouldn't have too long of expressions, but sometimes it's useful to just throw a plus sign in there because it's like a number, but it's coming back as a string. Yeah.
So on your last console log where it's type of cookie num and it returns number.
Yeah, because if we had type of NaN, it'll return number. Yeah. I know, it's sort of funny. NaN is like not a number, but it's sort of the like, yeah, it's a little bit weird that not a number is type of number, but that's what it is. Because you're like coercing something into a number. So like it's going to return type of number, but it's like not a thing. Yeah, I know, it's funky.
It would just be confusing if you were like making it a conditional.
Oh, if
like
it's
a string you turned into a number, but it's not a number, but the condition would be true.
Yeah. Well, what you could do is you could do like if and let's see. So we have cookie num here. If cookie num, and we'll go over truthy falsy in a second. Console log true. We'll just make this like simple. Else console log false. So here we're saying like if this is sort of like a truthy thing. So you can do certain checks. Like you could do a check of like if type of NaN is number and it's a truthy statement. If you wanted to do like coerce it into a number and do a thing with the number, and it'll still return false. But yeah, we'll get into truthy falsy in a second. But like, yeah, that was a great observation about not a number seeming weird for a type of number. So does coercion, I don't think, oh yeah. So coercion, there's like a set of rules, the like people who make the new things in JavaScript, like the arrow function in ES6, decide sort of like what wins if you're like trying to do some arithmetic between two things. They're confusing. Sometimes it's like when this and this is combined, it does a thing. It's not super intuitive. The basic ones of like when a number and a string are added together, the string wins, kind of thing. You'll know after practicing playing with it for a while. But like the more side case things, definitely just look it up because or use type of operator to sort of see what's happening. Because yeah, memorizing all the rules that might change in like in the next version just seems like things that you shouldn't have to fill your brain with. So yeah, we're gonna focus a lot on coercion in the workshop too. You'll be coercing things from like one thing to another. But yeah, does coercion sort of make sense of like what it is and like when it's useful? Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's like a pain. You're like, why is this a string? Cool. So I'm going to have us take a 5-minute break, just like get water, go to the bathroom. Then we're going to talk a little bit about truthy, falsy, and like equal sign, like comparators.
It was a coercion, so if you could point
Oh.
yeah, there, here. No, up. Next one. Yes, the one that you said applied implicit where.
Oh yeah.
And then there was another one after this where you said
Oh,
A is equal to.
when I was like reppling it. Was this sort of it?
No, it was one of the documents where I keep going back.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, no,
I
no.
just want
worries.
to make sure I understand it because I was totally gone. Maybe one more back. Sorry.
Oh yeah, no worries.
Yes, here you explained how did you get from string 1 I know, string 2 I understand, some I understand. There was so maybe next one, yeah, that was clear, and then I got confused on the next one. And after this, yes. Yeah, no, the one before.
This
part, and when we went from like the combined, so you said over here combined should be 48. But
Yeah.
you said combined over here is going to be a string. Why?
Yeah, so it's the string 48 because it's taking 4 and 8 and just squishing them together and making a string.
Yeah, but because we've already done the combined, we've said the variable declared is equal to 48 already.
Yeah.
Shouldn't this be 48 also?
So combined is the string 48. So what it does is it takes 4 and makes it the string 4 and 8, and then it concatenates them.
Oh, because we're not saying.
So we're coercing the number into a string.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
and
so that's why I didn't see it. Okay.
yeah, so that's what's like funky, but then like my num will still be a number.
But if you're working in the program and you said that the combined variable and you go and return value for the combined variable should be 48 though.
Yeah. As a string.
As a string.
Yeah.
48. Okay.
Yeah.
But it's just when you're asking for the type of.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah. So type of will be like a string of like string or number or like whatever type it is.
Yes. Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
No. That.
Sorry.
Yeah. I'm glad you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Pretty much.
The value of certain type originally a string. Yeah. But when you put this that will either either that if the value is still different. So it used to be else it should be doesn't. Either way, yeah. Just when you put it to
Okay, I think everyone's back, yes? Wait like another minute. Okay, truthy falsy. It sounds a little funky, but it's pretty much trying to figure out what the underlying Boolean value of a thing is. Pretty much like, does this exist, is a way to think about it. So when we coerce a thing into a Boolean, for example, in like an if statement, we want to see whether or not it's like truthy or falsy if it exists. So if we have like if my array is like an actual thing. It's like an array with values. So it's going to see this as truthy. So it'll run what's within the curlies of this. My string, even though it's quotes false, it's a string with value in it. So that's also going to be truthy because it's not analyzing like what the string is. It's not going to be like, oh, it says false in here. It's just going to say like, oh, this has like a length of a thing. So I'm going to do it. My num also is truthy because 12 is a value. So this would like run. I think this would become like an infinite for loop because this is like the conditional. Oh no, when it hits 0, my num will. So it'll run 12 times. And then my null is null, my undefined is undefined, and my string is a value that's truthy. So because this is false and true returns false, so false or false will be false. So this will be false. But that's because my undefined and my null are both falsy. And I think the next slide. Yeah, so there's like pretty much only 5 values that are falsy, 1 for each type. So an empty string is falsy, the number 0 is falsy, null is falsy, undefined is falsy, and false. The Boolean false is falsy. Yeah. So if you see like any of those, that's going to be a falsy statement. Otherwise, it's going to be a truthy statement. One thing that's like sometimes weird is you might have a variable with the number 0 and you want it to be the number 0. It's like a thing that exists. You want it to be the if, go into the if statement, but it'll see that as being falsy. So it's nice though to have these checks. You don't have to say like if my array like doesn't equal undefined. You can just say like if my array is a thing. And that's like a way to sort of keep your code dry, not having doesn't equal undefined on like every if statement. The logical not. This is fun. It's also called the bang. And what it does is it sort of like flips the Boolean. So if you had bang true, it would return false, and vice versa. So if we have like 0 is falsy, so if we have like bang 0, it's going to return true. So this is a nice way to do recursion for like the opposite of what you want, where like you're like, here's a number, like bang my number, and then it'll return like true or false based on whether or not it's like not true or false, which can sometimes be confusing. So that's why there is this double bang, which is really useful, and it sounds silly, but like it's really fun. And it's a way to coerce like a thing, a type, into like a solid true or false Boolean, where the type of will be a Boolean. So here we have hello world, which is truthy because it has value, it has letters. And so if we like double bang hello world, the first bang will turn it false because it's the not operator. It's like that like middle school, elementary school joke, like not. So it like turns it false. And then the second bang turns it true. So it's a way to coerce like a thing into whether or not it exists with the double bang. It's super useful. And it's nice to then you have a type of Boolean that's telling you whether or not something exists. Or is like truthy falsy in like a very solid way. So as I said, there's really only 5 times. Oh, NaN. I knew I was missing one. 6. There's only 6 times something will be falsy. Empty strings, null, undefined, NaN are all expected falsy statements. Before in the REPL when I did like and cookie num, and that had the value of NaN, that was a falsy statement, so that's why it didn't run the if block. So those are all 4, 5, 6. Those are expected. Those are falsy. And 1. False is always falsy. But 2 and 3, it's nice when those are falsy because maybe you only want to console log out a name if you have like a string with a name in it. And like if for some reason like an empty string gets returned, you don't want to console log that out. But sometimes you want to like do the operation, like you've done like you've like played with a number and like gotten this result of 0, and you want to do a thing with that number. So it's something to keep in mind if like for some reason something's not running. It might be because it's like returning a falsy statement. But yeah, so all these are falsy statements. Everything else is true. Any array, like an array with null in it, that's going to be true. Any object, array, object, function, even if it's an empty array, it's going to be a truthy statement because it's an object. Is that the last? So some ways we can use that is to make like better test expressions where we're not saying like is not undefined. Whenever you see is not undefined in code, you can just like make that if that variable name. And it makes it just like a lot more clear because you're just sort of saying like if this is a thing, run this code. And it makes it more legible. Like you don't want to ever say like if it's an empty string or if it's not an empty string kind of thing, just because yeah, it's just like more code. Like, you want to keep things concise, dry, don't repeat yourself. Like, the less code to do a thing, the better. So that's why here, instead of I modulus 2, checking if this is even, doesn't equal, or like equals 0 or whatever, you just want to see like whether or not this is like true or false. So that's like much less code. It's like one exclamation point and some parentheses. Okay, so on your own, real quick, then you grab the person next to you, go through these and sort of figure out, like, would this be true or false? Bang, bang, bang. Okay, so okay, so the first one, let's see, true, false, false. So 5 is true because 5 exists. 4 modulus 2 returns 0, so that's why that's false. Undefined is a falsy statement. This one is false because a dot length is 1 minus 1 is 0, so 0 is falsy. This one is true because it's an array with the values, so it's just seeing like whether or not it's like a thing. And then the empty array is also true because an object, an array, a function, even if it's empty, is going to be truthy. So sometimes if we did bang bang array.length, that will be false. So that's sometimes you want to see whether or not there's something in an array or in an object or something. That's where like you'll see like if my array.length, and that checks like if there's anything in the array. Like maybe you only want to loop through the array if there's stuff in it. Otherwise, like what's the point? So dot length is helpful in that. Cool. Does that make sense why all those returned what they did? Cool. Okay, and then the triple equals versus the double equals. We were talking, a few of us were talking earlier today. Like I said earlier, JavaScript was written in 10 days. Crazy. Like, I don't think they slept because that's a quick time to write a whole language. But they actually forgot the deep equals operator. So they originally only had the double equals, but then it was a mistake. They didn't have this deep equals thing. It was more of like a shallow equal. So they added the triple equals afterwards. So that's why there's two different comparators in JavaScript of like double equals versus triple. Other languages don't. I, in an interview, accidentally did 3 equals sign when like fake whiteboarding with like C#, and they laughed at me because I did 3 equals, and they're like, oh yeah, JavaScript is weird. So 3 equals, strictly equal. So that means like 1 and 1, like they're equal, but 1 and the string 1 are not deeply equal. So like if they try to coerce it into the type, or like they don't try to coerce it into the type the way the shallow equals does. So it's like only if it's like it really is the same thing. One thing to also note is like you can't have like a array and like with the same values and triple equal that, because when it comes to primitive types, it's like that's solid, that like is a thing. When it's the object types, it's comparing where in memory on your disk it is. So you can't do like an array with number 1, 2, 3 triple equals array with number 1, 2, 3 and get true, because it's not the same stuff. The loose equality, or like the shallow equals, it'll try to coerce it into the same type. So it'll take this and it'll coerce this. Actually, I don't know which one it coerces, but it coerces one of them. This either to a string or this to a number. And it says like, oh, if it's coerced, is it the same thing? That's why this is a falsy value. It's an empty string. So coerced into a Boolean, it's false. So false does equal false. So if it can be coerced into the other one and equal it, that's when the double equals works. Like I said before, there's a ton of different coercion rules, 36 of them to be exact. There's a link here. I don't know if I can click this.
I can find this file because online was provided and
Oh,
page
perfect.
11.
Yeah, so this is like all the, like if, you know, you try to multiply a string and a number together, like it'll try to coerce it into a number. But if you try to add them, it coerces it into a string. It gives you all those rules. Again, don't memorize them. Just sort of like try to look it up if you think something weird is going on. Because you don't, yeah. So also you want to always use the triple equals. Like, I don't know over time when the double equals would be needed, when the triple equals wouldn't, if you're writing clean code. Like, because you don't want to be comparing like 2 different types to seeing if it's equal. You don't want to be doing coercion just like on the side willy-nilly. So yeah, just like always use triple equals. If it only works for double equals, like maybe rewrite that code in some way. Just because it's probably something like you're doing some sort of like funky thing that like someone might not get right away, because coercion is like so implicit. Like it's just like, it just happens and you're not like writing specific code for it most of the time. So yeah, just always use triple equals. It's like cleaner. It's good practice. Oh, because it's the last line. So, yeah, those are the double versus triple equal sign. Are there any questions on like the 2 of those?
The presentation that you shared about the equality is not included in the workshops. Will
Oh.
that included?
Like these slides?
Yes.
Oh, interesting. I'll send out these slides if you want. Yeah, that's funky. It probably just hasn't been updated. Yeah. Okay, cool. Get more water or a snack. I'm going to get pears out for the workshops.